Meeting to order, and it's Monday, May 8th of 2023, and this is the Stoughton Plan Commission meeting, and we do have a quorum, and we are certified in compliance with open meeting laws. And the first item on the agenda tonight would be to elect a vice chair. I would accept nominations for vice chair.
I'd like to nominate Bill Caramel.
Any other nominations? Any other nominations? One more time, any other nominations? Hearing none, we'll close. All in favor, say aye.
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 Wasn't very convincing. All right. Alder Caravello is elected as the vice chair. Thank you very much. I'll try not to miss too many meetings.
Thank you.
All right. Next item is to consider approval of the Plan Commission meeting minutes from April 10th, 2023, and the Joint Plan Commission and Common Council minutes of April 11th, 2023. I would entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Schumacher. Any discussion on the minutes? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed, that motion carries. Next item is City Council Representative Report. Vice Chair, Alder Commissioner Caravello. Make sure you push your button.
That's right. Okay, there we go. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. At the April 11th council meeting, R5859 and R60, along with Ordinance 5 of 2023, were all approved. And at the April 25th council meeting, Ordinance 10 of 2023, with an amendment to modify the proposed 80-foot right-of-way for the street from US 51 to County Highway B to 100 feet, was approved.
All right, any questions on that? Hearing none, staff report.
Nothing of particular importance to highlight, but if there's anybody that has questions related to the items that are contained in the report, I'll try to answer them.
Any questions from commissioners?
There's great excitement from the high school kids that Popeyes has broken ground, so.
Very good.
All right, next item is item number 8, 2605 Cromwell Court, Lot 27, and the rear portion of 2500 Jackson Street, Lot 15 of Kettle Park West, Plan Development, General Development Plan. We will have a need for a public hearing, but before we go into that, do you have anything for us, Director Shield?
The concept plan has been presented to the Plan Commission before, as well as to Council. You'll recognize that they've modified the site plan to increase the number of buildings on the site. They've tried to address the concerns that were raised about emergency response or emergency access. We can go to the site plan when we get to that point, but certainly there has been an effort to try to acknowledge the comments that were raised previously by the Plan Commission and Council. The concept plan shown on the screen at this point shows the potential for 4 buildings. It could be more than 4. The unit count and the makeup of the buildings are still being contemplated, but the zoning tonight would allow for a number of things to be accomplished. Most notably, the exceptions to the MR20 or MR standards that they're seeking would be for multiple buildings on a single lot, reducing the minimum landscape surface ratio to 30%, typical is 50. Minimum building rear setback of 25 feet, typical is 50. And then each of the buildings could have greater than 12 units per building under the requested ordinance. When we get to that point in the ordinance, I have a recommendation for consideration to add something to the ordinance that's in your packet related to parkland dedication. and the continuance of this specific implementation plan. So once we get to that point, I'll certainly go through those. You'll recall that the rear portion of this site, or actually the rear portion of Lot 15, is the back side of the True by Hilton facility, currently zoned for business use. That would be changed to allow for this multifamily residential to be extended north from the backside of the True by Hilton and making a contiguous parcel with Lot 27. The next item on your agenda is related to this certified survey map that's being requested to make that combination of those lots into one. I'll also have a suggested easement to be added to the CSM related to emergency access. So once we get to that item, I'm just trying to give you a little background before you move into the public hearing.
All right. Thank you. Are there any initial questions from commissioners? Hearing none, we'll close our regular meeting and then we'll reopen for a public hearing. And I didn't have anyone signed up for this one, but certainly if somebody here would like to speak regarding this item at the public hearing, we would hear that now. Hearing none, we'll close the public hearing and we'll reopen for our business. So we'll be looking for a recommendation to the city council, and I think Director Shield mentioned that he might have some thoughts about that.
Yeah, the ordinance is supportive. It's a recommendation to move forward with it, but what I'm going to show here at this point is, at least what I'm attempting to show, is some additional language that would be included in the resolution, or in the ordinance.
Still sharing the other screen.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm sharing the wrong screen. All right. Thank you.
There it is.
All right. I'll zoom in, but I'm also going to read it so that the audience can hear it. So you might recall, or the request talks about the additional parkland that would normally be suitable for this number of units. So I've included some recommended language into the ordinance. It reads as follows: the rezoning shall not become effective until additional parkland has been transferred to the city of Stoughton to match the increased number of units approved for Lot 27. In the event the additional land, in brackets, option A is a preferred option, or option B is shown on Exhibit I, cannot be acquired, the Common Council may consider the collection of fees in lieu of dedication or the dedication of an alternate parcel. The additional item that was suggested to be added to this ordinance allows them I'll read it aloud. Upon approval of this ordinance, the specific implementation plan, or SIP, may be submitted and considered for approval. In other words, there may be some time where they're working to acquire the land that they don't own, these additional lands for the parkland dedication, but it will allow them to submit their application for the specific implementation plan for us to consider the site plan, if they so desire. Are there any questions on those modifications or anything related to the ordinance?
So basically what your recommendation is to allow them to move forward while they're trying to acquire the land, and if for some reason they're unable to secure that land, there'll be an option to either take money in lieu of, or basically the deal it wouldn't get rezoned at that point, so they wouldn't be able to develop.
It'd be a council decision to determine whether they're comfortable taking the fee in lieu and land dedication, or if there's an alternate parcel that's being proposed by the developer, the council could consider that as well. So those, allowing them to move forward, just to let you know, that's a procedural aspect. It doesn't allow them to begin work on anything other than preparing the detailed plan and submitting that for Plan Commission consideration.
So I guess I would look at the council members that are on the commission and maybe give us some thoughts about what you'd like to see, so the developers will have some direction. Alder Mayeski.
Well, first, this is kind of a chicken and egg thing. We shouldn't even be, I don't know if we should be entertaining this until after approval for the latitude that you're suggesting by the council. We can't approve something that council hasn't approved yet.
This is a recommendation to council.
All right.
Yeah, this ordinance is a recommendation. It hasn't been approved.
I understand that.
This is,
What I'm saying is that this should go through council first and then come here. That's all I'm saying.
I would suggest we drafted the ordinance to accommodate the request with the exceptions, and my additional recommendation were these 2 bullet points to be added before it would go to council. So that's for your consideration. They don't have to be in there if you don't want them to be. I thought it was trying to strengthen the city's position as to whether they wanted parkland instead of fees in lieu of dedication. So I was just trying to strengthen that position.
It seems like if it went to the council first, if it came back, there would be nothing for this commission to recommend. And maybe you're okay with that, but I think it offers an opportunity for this group to give some feedback, and then the council could choose to accept a recommendation or to approve something else. So it is kind of the chicken and the egg.
It is.
I guess my question to you, Alder Majewski, and the other alders would be is, I mean, if you were to put on your council hat for a second, what would you like to see at the end of this as far as the parkland?
Well, it would depend if it would go forward or not. I don't know that. I'm looking, I'll jump ahead a little bit. What bothers me about this project is not the fact that it's the project itself, is that, and I'm continuously bothered by the fact that we have projects come in and everybody wants exceptions to our ordinances. And I'm getting to the point where it's like, why do we have ordinances? Why, we want to drop our setbacks back. We want to reduce the amount of permeable surface. We want to this, we want to that. And here, this is another one. My frustration is growing with each development that comes through with all of the exceptions we have to what we think are well-written ordinances and zoning questions. But everybody wants to change and modify everything to fit what they think their need is, or to squeeze in a few more lots or a few more units or whatever. So I'm at that point right now where I'm questioning why we need so much of this. And if we go through and we approve this as a recommendation, then the developers go through and they start their planning, and it's expensive, and it's not necessarily, and then that's the excuse that's used, well, we can't stop it now because we spent all this money on planning all of this. And I agree with them, there's a lot of money. So it bothers me that we set things out, the city sets a roadmap out on how we want things developed, only to have it modified again and again and again, to the point where, are we actually planning anything anymore, or are we just kind of doing a knee-jerk reaction to this world? That's where I'm at.
Okay, I understand that. Not that it's any consolation. I don't think this is exclusive to Stoughton. What I've been hearing from other communities is similar, and one of the reasons for that is the standards, the regulations, environmental standards continue to change, which really limits some of the flexibility that maybe the developers had in the past to make these things cash flow. So I think that's a reason. It's not an excuse. That's what's happening out there. I think one of the things we could do long-term is we look at our ordinances to see if what we have in there is really a current standard or if it's dated. I think those are some things that we can look at, really may or may not be relevant to this decision. Is there anything on the parkland specifically? I guess that's what I was looking for, is if this group makes a recommendation as outlined by Director Scheel, He's gonna put up the options on the parkland. If you have a strong preference either way on option A or option B. And I don't know if you wanna walk us through that. Because my assumption is that you'll want the parkland and not the lieu of. That's my assumption, but I want to make sure that I'm clear with that. Alderperson, or Commissioner Farrell, did you have a comment?
Yes, Mayor. Becky, push the button. Yes, yep. And then when you're done, you can push it again. There's a little red light that's going to come on your mic here. If you're on.
Okay. I'm getting some feedback. Maybe I'm too close?
You're good.
Okay. Yeah, my question was, in lieu of cash, does that get stovepiped to go to future acquisition, or can that be spent on anything?
Yeah, fees collected in lieu of dedication have to be used for purchasing of parkland.
Okay. Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
So on the map here, we have option A and option B, and the idea would be to add on to the existing park that's been approved. And I don't know if you have an opinion one way or another. You know, there may be more development later that we may end up with option A and option B anyway. In the long haul, it's just a question of what order.
So can I just
Sure.
expand on this
Yep.
slightly? So just north of option A and to the east of option B, there's a 4-acre parcel here that we did have additional parkland as part of a transaction, as part of the development as that progressed. Option A, or the location A, is primarily a wooded tract of land. Speaking with the recreation director, it's my understanding they had a conversation at Parks and Rec about which was their preference, and I believe option A was the preferred option for parkland. Option B would be secondary, based on, and that's actually how it's, or why it's written that way, because it's based on what feedback I got from the recreation department.
Any other thoughts, or Alder Schumacher?
I mean, I would go for the A, and certainly, I would prefer having the actual dedicated land rather than the payment in lieu of. And I do have to agree with Tom about the exceptions that come into the ordinance, and we should certainly task to have a look at whether they're modernized or not. Otherwise, you know, this becomes an exercise of back and forth all the time, and I think ends up wasting all of our time.
Point well taken. Alderperson Caravello?
Yeah, I agree with what Alder Majewski and Schumacher have said about the making exceptions with our ordinances. I have a kind of a funny question maybe about, and I don't see the street name labeled on this, so I'm not sure, but there are east of A and B at the corner of Oak Opening and whatever that other street is, where there are 7 parcels that are indicated to be developed for houses. I don't know where these are at as far as
They've been platted.
they've been platted.
They're building the infrastructure for them right now.
Okay, then never mind that. I wasn't a big fan of those parcels being there to begin with a few years ago, but if they're already, if that train has already left the station, basically, yeah, one of my questions was how Director Glynn's, Park Director Glynn's thoughts were on whether A and B, and, you know, I guess either, depending on how things go. But yeah, definitely the parkland option as opposed to fee is where I would go.
Alder Majewski?
I'd like to see option C, which would be, instead of a block of land contiguous to this park and just making it bigger, what we sorely lack, what I notice that we sorely lack when we are platting lands with parks on them is that we have very weak trail connections between parks. You know, we get a trail, and the trail is a 20-foot wide corridor with a chunk of asphalt on it, supposedly. Basically a glorified sidewalk with, or sometimes the trail is right along the road, which is basically a sidewalk. I would like to see us start putting away corridors of land that are a little bit wider than that to connect to a future park. Has that been discussed?
Thank you. I'm not familiar with the discussion about the trail corridor connection between this parkland and future parkland to the north. I have seen concepts for development of this 4-acre tract, which talks about a more linear park environment. And I think part of that was to extend westerly more. I do not know if there's a connection anticipated north and south through here.
I'd like us to be actually a planning commission and actually do planning instead of, like I said, a lot of knee-jerk reaction to what's being served to us. And I think that would be another option that we could look at.
Okay, and just for the developers, I wanted to follow up on Alderperson Caravello's point. I think the concern is the amount of street frontage to the park. And we're hoping that as this develops, that as the park gets bigger, that the street frontage will grow with it. I think is kind of the point is trying to be made here. And we're somewhat limited with the houses that have been blocked there just to the north of the park. So if you can take that into consideration as you're looking at future plans, because I know that the Park and Recreation Committee will be having that conversation as well.
I did have one more, Mayor.
Go ahead.
The A bit that you have highlighted up there, does does that encompass that entire wooded space? I can see that in kind of in the satellite map, or is it just a portion of it?
I believe it's just a portion. I think it extends, the wooded area extends farther south, and I think even farther west.
Okay.
See if I can get
Or Commissioner Farrell.
Just sort of a general comment. I guess in my 20 years of doing facilities planning for the Navy, one of our favorite sayings was the Navy runs on waivers. It had volumes and volumes of ordinances that we were supposed to follow, but you know, one of the first things that senior officers usually ask is, can I get a waiver application? So I think, you know, ordinances, regulations, they're all good things to follow, but I think in reality, we need to step back and say this is a developer that is losing money on the hotel, trying to stay in business. So I think we need to be flexible and accommodate him to some degree that we think is reasonable anyway, and instead of saying this is a line thou shalt not cross. So just a sort of a general comment.
And just one other point for the developers, I think you probably sensed it, but if the group decides to move forward, including option A, certainly preserving the rest of the wooded area would be preferable. In fact, I would go as far to say if there was something that jeopardized that woods that would impede future development, I think the Park and Recreation Committee for sure feels pretty strongly about that.
on the screen is an aerial photo that shows you that general area.
All right, any other questions or comments on this one? All right, hearing none. So I think there's a resolution with some additional items that we'd like to include in that resolution.
It's an ordinance. It's a recommendation to council. I'll pull up. It's the same as in your packet with the exception of the highlighted area that's, will be shown on your screen here momentarily.
And certainly.
You can delete that, change it, or modify the ordinance in any fashion as well, but
And since it's an ordinance, the council will get really 2 rounds of it. So if you have any additional thoughts after it leaves here, you could certainly reach out to us or one of the council members for additional feedback. It'll get a first and a second reading. Alderperson Caravello.
If I can make another comment, I mean, I'm still not a real big fan of access for all of these units only through that Cromwell. Oh, sorry. I have to get used to this new technology. I'm still not a big fan of the access point for all those units being just through Cromwell Court as far as the primary access goes.
Yeah, I think the intent was to kind of cover that in the next agenda item, but we can certainly cover that now.
Alder Caravello is correct. The only residential connection would be off of Cromwell. What's being suggested in the CSM is to create an easement route across the southern part or across the hotel lot to allow for only emergency access vehicles, which would probably be managed by a gate. So it would not be a residential access into this residential community. The only access for residents would be off of Cromwell Court.
And I think we had a discussion with the previous proposal about the public using that to get in and out of the multi-unit as well as the hotel, and it might be conflicting. So I think that's why they reduced the number of units and then directed all that traffic coming in and out of the multi-unit from Cromwell Court based on the feedback that we provided. Go ahead.
I'm not seeing it in here, but I know somewhere in this packet, I saw a traffic engineering study that concluded that this was going to be substantially less than had they gone forward with the prior development. Is that correct?
Yeah, the analysis done by Kale Engineering is included in the packet, and I can actually go to the conclusions at least.
Oh, here it is. It's on page 26.
So the conclusions of that, or at least it's longer than this, of course, but there's a number of conclusions found at the bottom of this page, the 3 bullets on page 26 of this item.
Commissioner Robinson, I see you're on Zoom. Did you have anything you want to add? We haven't heard from you. I want to make sure you had an opportunity. And I believe you're muted right now. Go ahead, Tom, if you have something you want to add.
I don't. No.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure because you're the only one that's not in the room tonight, so.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. All right, so any other questions or comments?
I did have one more bit to go off of what Phil was talking about out of the, having the Cromwell Court as the access point. Were emergency services, I know that was in the minutes in our last one, and they are okay with that configuration?
Yeah, the answer is yes.
Okay.
Fire Chief Rip took a look at it, made some comments, and I think he was actually the one that suggested the gate, if I remember
Yeah,
correctly.
contained in the packet is actually a memo from the fire chief. I can pull that up. I guess I should have froze my screen. Sorry.
I do that to him all the time. It makes him dizzy.
At page 40,
Yep.
39 in the packet.
And the other thing that Chief Rip talked about, other than the traffic, is location of fire hydrants. That was another thing, and I don't know if that was something you were able to talk to the developers about.
Yeah, it was shared with the developers, but ultimately that would be part of the SIP step where we'd analyze that to make sure it complied with their distance requirements.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, I'm hearing none. So we do have the ordinance in the packet with the changes that we're recommending. So I would entertain a motion for the ordinance.
The ordinance in the packet does not have the yellowed items, so if you desire to include that, the version that would be on your screen would be the version that addresses that parkland topic.
You gotta push the button.
Yeah, yep. And then when you're, there you go.
I'll move that the ordinance be approved with the revisions provided by the planning director.
Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
Second by Schumacher. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed?
No.
One opposed. Okay, that motion carries. Next, item number 9 is the certified survey map, and I think we touched on it a little bit, but Director Shield, you want to go through the rest?
Yes, I will as soon as I get reconnected here.
Uh-oh. Thought that only happened to me.
The crux of the certified survey map is it combines lots 27 and 15, or 15 and 27, and I'll put that on the screen. I highlighted it in the previous discussion. I'll pull up a revised certified survey map resolution with the staff recommendation to add the bullet related to emergency access. Oh, wrong one. The resolution as recommended to be modified from the one in your packet is on the screen. It adds the one bullet point in yellow. I'll read the item out loud. An emergency access easement be added to Lot 1 from Jackson Street to Lot 2 to the satisfaction of the city. The intent is obviously to have that be maintained and allowed for emergency vehicles to get to that property in a secondary manner.
Any questions on this one?
Rodney, if that's gated, that access point is gated, who has access to that?
Yeah, the fire department has means to make that happen. We'd expect it to be gated in some fashion, so it's not a residential through pass. But they certainly have provisions and have talked about ways they might be able to accomplish that. They have other locations where they have gates.
Just them specifically and not the property owners, right?
To be worked out. We didn't talk about that specifically, but
Okay.
certainly to constrict or restrict others, non-intended users from using it.
Sure.
Do you have any insight on that?
I think it'll work.
Okay. Any other question? Alderman Maskey.
How are they going to maintain this right-of-way in the wintertime? Who is going to be plowing it, and how is it going to be stayed, is it going to be stayed open? Are they going to maintain the opening?
Yeah, it certainly have to be plowed. It's going to be an entirely paved route, recognizing the entire hotel site is paved all the way to the north property line to accommodate their trash receptacle that's there. So I don't think that part of it will be an issue. Maintenance will secure more of the maintenance discussion as part of the SIP if it progresses to that point.
All right.
Any other questions or comments?
No, I just going to find it interesting to see how they're going to plow with the gate in the middle of it, and they don't have a key.
Again, as I suggested, I don't know how they'll work that out, but they'll come up with a way where the property management folks would probably likely have a key to allow that to happen.
All right, so we're looking for a recommendation on this one to the city council as well. And this one is in a resolution format as on the screen, which included the highlight area. I would entertain a motion.
I'll recommend that resolution to council based on the addition Director Shield pointed out.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, any more discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 And any opposed?
Nope.
One opposed. Two, I'm sorry, two opposed. Thank you. That motion carries. All right, thank you very much. Next item is number 10, communication tower at 516 East Main Street. This is one that they've been working on for some time. We've made some modifications in order to get it to the point where we felt we could present it here. And Director Shield, whenever you're ready, you can give an overview of this.
So this is in the back portion of this particular property. The request is to put, I believe it's a 110-foot tall tower on the rear portion of this site. I think that's actually down from the original intended height. They also have proposed to make it look more like a tree, and I'll be able to show you some pictures related to that or illustrations. They did attend the Landmarks Commission, and Landmarks Commission has reviewed it, and their communication is actually in the packet as well. So let's see if I can get to some illustrations here.
And while he's looking for that, we do have some representatives here today from this proposal, so if you have any questions, I think there's 3 of them here. Is there anything you wanted to say ahead of time?
Doug Dolan and Melissa Olson.
Yeah, it looks like they're on Zoom, so
Yep.
if you have any questions for Doug or Melissa, they're available. Did you find it?
Yeah,
Okay.
this actually shows an illustration of what it would look like in this particular area from this vantage point. There's other pictures in in the packet as well. From the east, from Main Street. They've identified this area as an area that's underserved. This would allow for co-location of, I believe, a total of 4 different carriers could ultimately be on this particular facility at the time of completion.
Are there any initial questions? Any initial questions?
I have one.
Sure.
So if this tower gains approval, how does it affect the properties in the near vicinity for redevelopment?
For redevelopment,
Let's say that area is a pretty big area. It's kind of underutilized. Someone wants to come in and put in apartment buildings.
well, I think it would restrict the area where the tower is itself, but I don't think it would hinder the ability to redevelop the site
So,
absent the footprint of the tower facility.
so you're talking like a 40 by 40 foot base?
Yeah, I'll show you, it's in the packet, I'll pull it up on the screen. I'll try to zoom in so you get a better feel for it.
Are there guy wires?
There are
for
not.
this?
There are not. It's a monopole.
Right.
If I can get to another screen, there's one that's a little better that shows it physically on the parcel as well. It might be a little tough to see, but I'll zoom in as much as I can to still show you the relationship to Main Street. Well, I thought I could. This provides you at least I believe it's over 500 feet off of Main Street, so there's some depth between the location where the facility would be. It's adjacent to the railroad track or the railroad right-of-way. So it's actually in this general area.
It seems like from walking that not too long ago, the further you get back there, probably the less likely that would be developed. Would you say that's accurate?
I certainly agree with that assessment. Your more marketable parcels or areas closer to Main Street.
Yeah,
And plus the topography and the land use to the north becomes more challenging.
yeah, you have that steep hill from the back of River Bluff right back there. I don't know if you've been back there or not.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other person, Carabello?
I have, I don't know, it might be a similar concern to Tom's, but considering that I believe it's next week, there is going to be, or is it this Wednesday? I think it's next Wednesday. The RDA is going to be having some discussion, I think, about Depot Hill, potential things that might be happening there. And I just have a concern that this timing of this is kind of bad, or looking at this having impacts on potential development of this area. So that's a concern that I have also. And I know there's, an environmental thing, and I guess this is not something that is, I don't know if there's science to back this up at this point. There may be, but I'm not an expert in that area. Obviously, adjacent location to this, to River Bluff, as you mentioned, that this is just down the hill from River Bluff School. I'm a little concerned about that.
I should just highlight and reinforce, this isn't a brand-new application. They've been working for some time on this particular site. They had an application in before we were even considering regulations to these in a different manner. You might remember we actually did modify our ordinances, but it couldn't pertain to this particular site because this had already been submitted as an application. So I think they've certainly tried to address the concerns that had been raised. I think you might also recall the city attorney outlining some of the limitations we have on the ability to control the placement of some of these facilities. I think they've made an effort to try to address the aesthetic and placement location issues that were raised. Likewise, they did work through the Landmarks Commission assessment part of it as well. So I'm just highlighting some of the background if you didn't have that available.
Commissioner Farrell?
I think the sentence that jumps out to me is, as you said, Dr. Shield, the city attorneys indicate that if the applicant can identify a need for the tower in a specific location, then the city would have to approve it. So my only question would be, have they identified a need for the tower in that specific location? Because if the answer is yes, I don't know why we need to talk a whole lot about this.
We believe they have.
Any other questions or comments?
I should just highlight, the fact that I identified there's a potential for co-location on this. We also have been having conversations with another carrier about a tower need in this general area. We think that might increase the opportunity to maybe to co-locate here as opposed to having another tower in another location not too far from here.
Any other questions or comments on this one?
Do you mean by that, Greg Shield, 2 towers then, or just they would utilize the one tower?
Our hope is that now, once this one gets constructed, that'd allow for a co-location potentially on this new facility, as opposed to having a second pole in the not too far away potentially.
And being close to the rail easement, do they have to get the federal rail approval for it being as close to the tracks as it would be?
I don't know that that's a requirement related to the rail, since they're outside of that, but the height requirement, they have to adhere to FAA requirements related to that.
It seems that they would have to get that because if that fell over on the track, and that's an active track, so.
Any other questions or comments?
I have a quick question, since you were just discussing height, and since this would be somewhat down the hill, down that slope where this would be located, or at the bottom of that slope, and then the height of this, any idea what the elevation is at the top of that hill or slope that's there? I'm just trying to get it in, because generally you put these at a highest point so that they're most effective, I would imagine, for their efficiency of their signal. And if this is kind of set down in a slope or in a valley, that is created by the tracks being there. I'm just curious if you have any idea of what the
I
surrounding
haven't
elevations are.
evaluated the elevation difference, but it's probably 40 feet different,
Okay,
somewhere in that neighborhood between, I'll say, the River Bluff area and the base of this.
all right, and this is, the height of this
This
is
is 110 feet,
okay.
and at least from there, and maybe I'll get it from River Bluff just to give you an illustration again. I need a mouse. So that shows on the screen, at least, it being higher than the tree line of the River Bluff area.
Anything else you want to add? Okay. So we have a resolution in here, so I would entertain a motion for the resolution.
I'll make that motion.
Okay, a motion by Robinson. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Farrell. Any more discussion on this one? Hearing none, all of those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And any opposed? Two noes, all right. That motion carries. Next item, number 11, Stoughton Hospital, 900 Ridge Street, specific implementation plan. So this is one we're all kind of familiar with. We're kind of getting to the point where we're putting the final touches on this for the approval process. Is there anything you wanted to present tonight, Teresa, or do you want Rodney to do an overview of where you're at?
Rodney, take it away.
Okay.
So as you're aware that they've gotten the general development plan approved, we've now moved to the point where they've submitted the specific implementation plan. The areas that are shown in bold colors here are darkened out are the areas that are covered essentially with this SIP. The area, just to highlight, there was a future parking area along Ridge Street and Academy Street that will not be part of this SIP, and there's also one at the corner of Giles and Lynn in the south area that is not part of this. So they're not in the active motion to try to improve those. It is noteworthy that they heard the neighbors, and I think they heard the commission about trying to address grade issues related to the parking lot. Very pointedly, they actually have all of the traffic essentially coming out of the drive off of Church Street. So they do not have the access onto Lynn Street. They will be doing significant grade work in between the existing lot and the new lot to accommodate that, as shown on the site plan. And then they're making the improvements to the parking lot off of Main Street and expansion to that area along Giles Street, of course, along with the building expansion here. One of the concerns their thoughts was raised prior, would there be more parking than necessary? Right now, the parking that's being provided meets the minimum and maximum number of stalls that are allowed by ordinance for the use that will be put in as part of this phase. When they look to expand or finish off the additional areas within the hospital center, then they can come back with the SIP to expand the parking areas in those other locations. Certainly available to try to answer questions. There's a great deal of detail here related to a pretty extensive landscaping plan, but it's very consistent in layout, of course, with the GDP that didn't get into the site specifics, but the notable changes are related to this westernmost parking lot area that will be managed through the Church Street connection. There is one, I think, important thing to highlight right at this point. You might recall there's a median that kind of causes some constraints for our emergency vehicles. So they're removing that median as you enter their facility to allow for better ingress and egress from, as recommended from our emergency team.
All right, thank you. Are there any initial questions on this one? Commissioner Farrell.
Not a question, I just want to compliment the hospital for combining those two lots and taking the egress off of that residential street. I know that was probably not a cheap decision, but I think it's a good decision, and I just want to applaud them for that.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from commissioners? All right, so hearing none on this one here, there is a resolution, and keep in mind the SIPs only need approval from the plan commissioners, so this one will not go to council. This is it. So I would entertain a motion for the resolution.
I'll move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Majewski. Any other comments or questions? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Any opposed? None opposed. That motion carries. Thank you, Teresa. You bet. Item number 12 is Magnolia Springs final plat. Looks like we have 3 items related to Magnolia Springs. Director Shield.
The final plat has been submitted in a manner that's consistent with the preliminary plat that has been approved. Trying to work it is on the screen at this point. There is an ordinance or a resolution found in your packet with a recommendation to move forward with the final plat as outlined here. That still will be required to have a development agreement. Prior to the signing of the final plat, there's a number of conditions in the actual approval resolution, but the configuration of this area is consistent with the preliminary plat discussion. Certainly available to answer questions if there are any.
Any questions? Any questions on the final plat? Okay, hearing none. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I think this is the one that it has the retention pond up in the north west parcel that we had talked about previously. The shape, did the shape change? I can't recall. It looked like it's pretty much the same shape as we saw previously.
Yeah, the lot configuration's very similar to what was previously provided. We provided some information related to the grading and the pond elevation at normal water elevation through the Public Works Committee. We did make some modifications to that code for future ponds, but the pond elevation at normal elevation was really the piece that kind of tied into the new ordinance, so that the configuration, again, the lots remaining the same, but it'll be smoother transitions, if you will, on this one. And the refinement of the ordinance will be effective for all future subdivision development.
Oh, okay.
So as we're looking at, for example, the Stoughton Trailers area and others, the ordinance has been put in place now, and they will be subject to those ordinance standards. I think it was recognized that this one was along the way. They made some slight modifications, but it didn't require them to make outright changes to that.
Okay, so I thought there was an existing ordinance that said they were supposed to be sort of curvilinear.
Yep.
And this one is, yeah. So,
but it is to a certain degree, right? But what they, as we work to refine the ordinance for future, They did look at how this could be modified so that at the normal water elevation, it does look more curvilinear than sharp.
Okay, okay,
Right.
I'm picking up what you're putting down now.
Yeah, 'cause
So
you've
you're
got the-
looking at the water level, not
Yes.
the ground level, if you will, shape of
Right.
the pond.
The actual standing water configuration and how the banks come up.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
I want to make sure you were aware that there's 8 questions down in the chat box from the homeowner.
We see that, and certainly, we see that, and there is opportunity for public hearing on the next 2 agenda items. So once we get through this one, there is a public hearing that's been scheduled.
Okay.
Any questions on the final plat? Okay, hearing none. We do have a resolution in here on the final plat. I would entertain a motion.
I move that the final plat for the Magnolia Springs subdivision be approved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Schumacher. Any more discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, say aye.
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 And any opposed? None opposed. That motion carries. Next item is the Magnolia Springs rezoning. And before we get into the public hearing, we'll get an overview of what they're looking for the rezoning.
So the rezoning exhibit is on your screen. You'll actually have 2 public hearings. There's public hearing related to, I'll call them the traditional zoning for the institutional lands, the SR5, the single-family residential, both SR5 and SR6. The secondary public hearing will be held for the next item related to the general development plan / SIP for the areas that are labeled as PD. Plan development on this illustration. The PD zone lots, as proposed, would allow for twin homes and/or duplex type construction with setbacks similar to the single-family homes that are proposed on the SR5 and SR6 lots.
All right, are there any initial questions on this? Any initial questions on this one?
Maybe this is a simple question, but what's the difference between twin home and duplex if there's no setback differences and/or?
Yeah. So generally, your twin homes are going to be separate ownership, potentially. The duplexes might be one owner for the entire facility. You can have 2 owners. So it's almost semantical, the difference. The visible part is very limited. The PD lots that are listed here for the twin homes will likely be 0 lot lined. So that's kind of the distinction in this particular area where the 0 lot line would allow for separate ownership of either half. And for example, on the upper screen, lots 1 and 2, you've got one structure, you've got a lot line that goes down the center of the proposed building for separate ownership. Whereas the duplexes initially have not been submitted to be considered for a 0 lot line. Doesn't mean they can't be in the future, but right now, that's kind of the distinction between the 2.
This is pretty common with what's going on not only in Stoughton, but in Dane County. We're seeing a lot of the 0 lot lines right now, which I think it helps promote owner occupied, which is, a good thing. Any other questions?
Public hearing,
Yep.
I've got comments too.
You want to go into public hearing first? Okay, so no other comments. We'll close the regular hearing. We'll go into the public hearing. And on this one, at least initially, I didn't have anyone signed up to speak. Is there anyone that would like to speak regarding, this is the public hearing on the zoning part of it?
The zoning for the SR5 and the SR6 and the parkland and stormwater management areas.
Hearing nobody, we'll close.
Do you,
Or do you wanna make
they were
comments?
highlighted, there was somebody in the chat room,
Oh,
so there
okay.
might be some comments there.
There are some questions about the parkland and the walking trails and stuff. I'm not sure if that's relevant here or in the next public hearing.
Certainly, you can ask questions now, though. The public hearing isn't really meant to be a back and forth conversation, but if there's something that the commissioners would be interested in discussing, once we close the public hearing, they can use your comments as part of the deliberation. And we ask if you can at least keep your comments around 3 minutes. That would be helpful. But certainly, you can cover it now or you can cover it the next one. It sounds like either way, you have some things you'd like us to consider. And we would need your name and address for our records.
Okay, so my name is Karen Drugswald. My address is 225 Isham Street. I have home and properties that are adjacent to this new development, and specifically the playground and the walking paths that are being proposed are literally right on the other side of my property line. So some of my questions go into what can be done to prevent foot traffic on my properties. Obviously, I didn't build my property with a park right next to it, and I'm wondering if there is other opportunities to place a playground and walking trails so that they're not as disruptive to the existing residents in the neighborhood.
Okay. Did you have any other comments, or are those the things that you would like the commissioners to consider?
I think those are my my main concerns and issues with this. I also don't understand. There are about 4 retention ponds slash spring-fed ponds within like a mile, less than a mile, like kind of length. Is there a reason that they're not spread throughout the development? And in regards to the playground, there are, excuse me. There are about 5 parks within an 8-block radius. Why is another playground needed in this development?
Okay, anything else? I see commissioners taking notes.
Just that, you know, the city, it was kind of mentioned earlier on in this meeting, the city has ordinances and rules for a reason, right? And they apply to all the residents. Why are we allowing for setback and SIP exceptions for developers? I understand that it cuts their costs, but I'm not sure why cutting their costs and developers' cash flow is should be the city's problem, especially when we already have 3 developments taking place.
Okay, anything else you'd like to add?
No, those are the highlights.
All right, well, thank you for joining us tonight. Anybody else would like to speak at the public hearing on this matter? Hearing none, I would close the public hearing and then reopen for our regular business. Anything you'd like to highlight, Director Shield?
As was stated earlier, the preliminary plat outlined the areas for the open space, the stormwater management areas, the park facilities, and even the lot configuration. The discussion about exceptions, the exceptions are really being identified to have similar setbacks to the single-family residential. The duplexes and/or twin homes that are being split into separate ownership really provides almost a single-family atmosphere for that type of resident. So the trail and park system, the trails was touched on earlier. There's certainly an interest in trying to have trail connectivity to and through parks. Parkland dedication is a priority for the community. When additional residential units come online, there's a requirement for them for the developer to dedicate land to a certain amount of square footage per every dwelling unit. That's being accommodated as part of this plat, and the amount of land that's being dedicated is meeting the requirements for that dedication expectation. The actual playground facility, I know that our Parks and Recreation Committee and team worked to identify how this public space would be utilized, both the trail and potential area for a playground, as well as utilizing the open space adjacent to the wetland and the stormwater basins. There might be others on the commission that might have more background on that than I do.
Any questions or comments from the commissioners? Commissioner Farrell?
I don't see on the site plan where maybe it's not there, where a playground is specifically, a site for a playground is called out?
It's it's above the pond there. Rodney has it highlighted. It's in the blue there.
It's on page 15.
It's the one that shows the plat with the colored.
Actually, it's on page 5 of 15. I'm sorry, page 5. It's not called out, but it's the area on the north side of this.
Yeah, it's kind of in a yellowish color there. And the reason it was located there, quite frankly, is that's where the flattest topography is. So for placement of the playground equipment, we want to have a flat surface. And that was really, the best location for that. I think part of the conversation at Park and Rec, and certainly other Caravella can fill in the blanks, was to really try to utilize the wetland as a feature and not disturb that. And then, based on topography and the engineering kind of determines, where the ponds go. And then as Director Shield highlighted, we wanted to have connectivity to the trail, and as it goes to the west, it'll connect to the corridor that we had set aside that leads kind of north to Isham Street and comes out toward Lowell Park for that connectivity. So that was kind of the rationale there. So the trail kind of goes between the back of the duplexes and the back of the existing lots that are there toward the west. So it doesn't cut between houses, it kind of runs parallel to the backyards. Did I miss anything?
That was, I believe, the primary reason, like, as you noted, the topography for the playground, because that's about the flattest spot there, because I think saying that the terrain there is undulating would be an understatement. There's some interesting hills going on in short distances in this space. I do have a question about notification of neighbors, the folks on Isham Street during this process. People have been noticed previously, I'm guessing, going back a considerable amount of time as far as regarding planning to this and opportunities to provide comment or feedback, I hope.
Yeah, I believe we even had a public hearing related to the preliminary plat. Property owners within 300 feet would have been directly notified then, just like they have been related to this rezoning.
I mean, I do have a, you know, if I lived on Isham Street there and there was a playground or park going in, I guess I would have concerns, so I would have hoped we would have heard from somebody sooner, but sometimes notices just don't get noticed, I guess, basically. And I don't know if at this point, you know, considering the terrain, if there's anything that we can actually look at as far as how to use this space as far as concern of where that playground could be located.
I guess
My question to that would be is, so on the final plating, is that like the final say on the playground equipment, or could that be moved if we were to find another spot?
Yeah, so the plat identifies the parcels of land and the areas for open space and parks and recreation and stormwater. How that park land is developed and improved is outside of the final plat process. And that's a Parks and Rec initiative.
Commissioner Farrell?
I guess I certainly empathize with the resident that called in that location that's not identified, but if I'm understanding it, it's to the north of that SWM, right?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, were that my yard, I would not want that in my backyard either. That's not just a NIMBY thing. The park, I think, is fine because you're going to have people there, but you're not going to have them congregating in a more static fashion, if you will, than at that park, the playground rather, not the park. So, the location of the playground does bother me. I understand the topography challenges, but, I guess I'd also look at, is it absolutely necessary we have that there? But I think from a residential standpoint, the resident standpoint, I think it's a horrible location. So I would, and if we approved it, you say it's left up to the parks to decide where they put it. I mean, that's sort
The
of
park
passing
equipment, yeah, and I think initially they landed there because of, like I said, the topography.
Right.
They could certainly, take another look at it,
But-
but we're really limited on really even how much space we had to work with.
But if we approve it, then we're sort of giving parks the authority to say, we're going to put this where we want it to, right?
Yeah, well, and Alder Caravello's on park, so he can carry the torch.
Okay.
Alder Majewski?
Look, this parcel of land is going to be developed. You're going to have houses behind it, up against it, or you're going to have open space where occasionally you will have children playing and or people recreating. As far as where it's going to be placed, the city does do master planning for their parks, so they have the people who are concerned will have ample time to comment and find out more specifics. As far as placement of it, I have no problem with it being right there. It's got to be someplace that's logical, is someplace that serves a greater good, and it's a quality of life that for everybody. It's not just the concern of one or two of the neighbors, although I understand their concerns, but we live in a community. We all do our thing. I'll do our part. Thank you.
And being on parks, I just want to say that, it's something that we can, since this is, the playground isn't there yet. And we can always look and see if there is a more appropriate location for that. I mean, the park is going to be there, but if there's a different place that the specific playground can be located, you know, we don't want to be disruptive to neighbors, don't want to be disruptive to anybody, but, you know, I don't think the trail is a concern as far as anything that would be considered a disruption or anything like that. But yeah, that's something we can look at. Like I said, the playground isn't there yet.
Okay. Any other comments on this one? So we're looking for a recommendation on, this is the zoning. And we do have a resolution on that.
It's an ordinance that.
Ordinance, I'm sorry.
It's an ordinance, it's on your screen and in your packet. It's a recommendation to City Council. Again, this is the first one is related to all the parcels that are not planned development. That'll be the next item.
So at this point, I would entertain a motion for the ordinance.
Keep that motion.
Motion by Robinson, is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Farrell. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
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 And any opposed? That motion carries. Number 14 is the General Development Plan. Director Shield.
As was highlighted as part of the last item, this is related to the parcels that are shown on the screen, designated plan development or PD. It identifies those areas to allow for the setback to be 20 feet to match the setback requirements of the SR5 and SR6 district elsewhere in this subdivision. There's an ordinance that would be recommended to council in your packet related to this request as well. The deviation or the exception that's being made is limited to the rear yard setback. Therefore, it seems logical to include the additional bullet that's shown here, that the SIP review is waived, because there isn't a reason to, the building envelope's being established by this, and you're looking at, you're not changing the use, you're just identifying the building envelope. So as part of this, it's not recommended to have to bring back the SIP plan for each individual 2-unit that would come before the commission.
Any questions or comments before we go into a public hearing on this one? Hearing none, we'll close the regular meeting. We'll reopen for the public hearing. And I didn't have anybody signed up for this one as well, but certainly if anybody wishes to speak regarding the general development plan, you can let us know. Hearing none, we'll close the public hearing and reopen for our regular business on the general development plan. I would entertain a motion for the GDP.
I'll make the motion to recommend the GDP resolution.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Commissioner Farrell. Any discussion on this one? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
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 And any opposed? None opposed, that motion carries. So these items will be coming to the City Council
2 weeks from tomorrow.
2 weeks from tomorrow. We do have a public comment at City Council as well, in case there's something else that might have been missed tonight, or certainly can communicate that at the council meeting in 2 weeks from tomorrow. Next item is the Urban Service Area Amendment for US 51 and County B development, also known as the STI. Director Shield.
So the urban service area amendment process is actually an application by the city. As was prepared on our behalf, MSA has been working to put this document together. We've played a role in review and recommendations, or they have been incorporated at a staff level. Stoughton Utilities, myself, have been involved in providing comments related to the application materials. And so it is with our recommendation to have this submitted to the Capillary Regional Planning Commission to include this area into the urban service area. It's the next step in the development process for this area. I can highlight that it does include area that's larger than just the STI or the Stoughton Trailers Inc. area. And on your screen is the entire area that's shown to be included. This was a logical expansion for development in areas that are within the city of Stoughton already. Not all of which, but this area on the west side of 51, most of this is already in the city. There's a 31-acre tract here that's being contemplated for annexation. And then the area on the east side of 51, except for these existing homes, are all within the city limits already. And as part of the area on the east side is part of the STI development that's being contemplated for more immediate development. The 7 acres, or a little over 7 acres in the bottom right-hand side, is already contained within the urban service area. It's just highlighting that area doesn't have to be added at this point.
All right, any initial thoughts or questions on this one? We have developers here, if you have any questions for STI or engineers or just anything in general. I think it's pretty straightforward. This goes through when you expect CARPC to look at it.
Yeah, so once council approves the submittal, it will be transmitted to CARPC. It'll probably be another 2 months before they'd actually have the hearing on the document.
2 months?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Alder Caravello.
I do have just one thing that I want to point out, and I know that as the written comments flashed up on the screen for our previous agenda item, I thought this was pertinent because this is a question I had. As we continue to grow and our capacities to accommodate this growth, the question marks of our capacities to accommodate this growth, I just want to point out the component in this document regarding the estimated flows, impacts on the wastewater treatment, and that just as we continue to grow and Dane County is growing crazy, and a lot of places, a lot of municipalities are focused on growth. There is this comment in here from Stoughton Utilities recognizing that, and this is not just from this development, but from Magnolia Springs and Stonecrest, and that they state, the Stoughton Utilities recognizes potential need to increase plant capacity as these new developments come online and to support additional future development. So I just wanted to make that point just for folks that don't have this document in front of them.
Yeah, and to add to that is the area to the north and west of this area. I think that's really to highlight some additional lands to the farther to the west and north. They're not included in this urban service area application, but that's part of the acknowledgement of having to, as you get to the periphery, you have to reassess and make sure your plant capacity is adequate. And this already takes into account the Magnolia Springs area that was recently added, and as well as the Stonecrest area. So those have already been kind of incorporated in, because these follow, or this one follows those previous submittals.
Any other questions or comments on this one? Hearing none, so we're looking for a recommendation through a resolution to City Council. I'd entertain a motion. there a second?
Second.
Second by Schumacher. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor say aye.
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 And any opposed? None opposed. That motion carries. Item number 16, extraterritorial land division at 3065 Sam Miles Road in the town of Dunkirk. Director Shield?
This particular location is on the very periphery of our ETJ area. I'm going to pull up a map that'll show you where it is. At least I'm working to do that. Let's see here. So the dot in the bottom part of the screen here is the actual location. So it's just about a mile, little less than a mile and a half from our existing boundaries. The intent is to split off the farm from the tillable acreage for this property. And it's not within our planned urban development area, so we recommend approval of it.
Questions, comments?
They're splitting off the homestead, so I think that somebody else is gonna farm the land, and they're gonna have the house be a separate owner.
All right. I would entertain a motion for this one.
I'll move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Schumacher. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Future agenda items, Director Shield, you have anything?
We would anticipate the STI area, preliminary plat and zoning to be coming at some point in the not too distant future. That would be likely in the next couple of meetings. That's what I have on my radar right now, is the big item.
Anything from commissioners?
I'd like us to see it, start moving the wheels forward on review of our ordinances, especially focusing on looking in the past at requests for forgiveness, so to speak, or what's the word I'm looking for?
Variances.
Variances. And see where that's at so that we can modify so that we don't keep on going down this Groundhog's Day.
I'm gonna agree with Tom on that for sure.
All right. Anything else? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
Schumacher. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Not opposed. Thank you. Have a good night.